Gelfand game. This is somewhat related to our lesson yesterday, where we were looking for potentially winning lines for Black out of the King's Indian defense. This, I'm sure, is one, and promises to be a pretty exciting game, as Nakamura's high level games usually are. So let's take it from Nakamura's perspective, so we can see Black's side of this. The first thing, we're looking at this eval, pretty accurate, very accurate for Black, as one would expect. And we'll be able to probably get some, knowledge of King's Indian defense theory here. Uh, what a well played Indian King's Indian defense looks like. D4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4. Black basically gives white a spatial advantage and control of much of the center. This sort of central expansion is strong, and black will find a way to create a pawn push to disrupt the center. Hey, how's it going, Aphelion? Thanks very much for joining the stream. This is interesting. This is one of the games related to our lesson from I think yesterday, where we were talking about the King's Indian defense, and here we'll have an opportunity to see what a world level player is able to do against it. So with this d6 formation, yes, this is a Gelfand Nakamura, extremely high level game. Not expecting to be able to provide much corrective advice here, but we should be able to demonstrate what a really well played King's Indian defense looks like. Here, knight f3, castles, bishop e2, e5, and basically white castles, with black challenging for the center. It's kind of an interesting question. Should either side want to relieve this pressure here? I think in general, white has control of the center, even with e5 having been played. There are moves like pawn takes e5 here, trading off the queen early. But let's look at what the different options are. Castling, which is what was played, is the most common. Bishop e3 is an option. D5 is an option, closing the center. And pawn takes e5 is an option, probably with the goal in mind of trading queens on d8. I'm sort of curious about this line, actually. D takes e5, D takes e5, and then queen takes d8 in a great majority of the time. That's pretty interesting. Um, I Yeah, let's take a look. So this idea closes the center, and this is the type of game that we were looking at the most yesterday. In this King's Indian defense, the knight plays to e8 and f5 gets played. F5 coming, basically black going for expansion on the queen side, and white going black going for expansion on the king side, and white going for expansion on the queen side here. But f5 is going to be played, and the attack of black on white's king side will begin. Here, we have a few interesting things going on. So, here the eval is pretty favorable to white, but black is attacking. He's hoping for some type of tactical misstep, and hoping to do as well on the king side as he can. It's a tough king side to break into, but with f4, g5, g4, black is going to attempt to get his pieces, behind the pawn storm, and then have the ability to advance his pieces on the king side. This type of defense is pretty interesting. I mean, there aren't that many openings out of d4 where black very early gets into attacking position. But this is one of them, and the pressure that black exerts on the white king side is probably something that can be basically if he successfully exerts this pressure on the white king side, he has the opportunity to win material, which will quickly offset that positional advantage caused by white's better center and better queen side. C5 advances on the d6 pawn. Interesting. I mean, basically the d6 pawn. If pawn takes d6, pawn takes d6, then that d6 pawn becomes a target of, a potential target for attack for white. It'll be backwards, and the rook will take the c file. I think is white's larger plan here. Knight f6 behind f5, f3, f4, knight c4. And here, you know, basically g5, g4, h5. I think basically moving those pawns forward there, I think black will be showing a spatial advantage on the king side. You know, whether he can convert is, you know, has a lot to do with efficiency and good organization. But you know, this is the attack delivered for black that this opening encourages. Pawn takes c5, bishop takes c5, h5, a4, a5, and white is attacking hard on the queen side, but with no real ability. You know, it's a sort of different attack. I mean, basically this you know, this queen side attack is trying to you know, basically weaken black's queen side, but without the leverage of having any checking or king safety issues. These types of kingside attacks, I think, are not generally as strong. G4, uh, B6, G3, King H1, and now White is having to expend moves playing efficient defense here. This is tricky. You know, basically, how does White defend the most efficiently? You know, H4, H3 looks really dangerous for White, in my opinion. Things like H4, H3, pawn takes G2 leave the king in a very precarious position. But moves like that will take a while to organize. Bishop to g1, knight to h4, rook to e1, knight takes, pawn takes, knight takes. And here, yeah, this is interesting. Rook to g7, king f1, bishop to h3. And I guess I don't know exactly, you know, basically this looks like a very opened king side. But let's see where the eval shifts here. D takes c7 was a mistake. Okay, so the engine finds it. Knight takes e1 is the best move. Let's just go through the engine's full transposition and see how it compares. It's probably exactly the same given how strong these players are, but I am curious. Queen takes c7, knight to b6, bishop takes f1, queen takes f1, rook d8, knight to d5, and overall here, you know, basically, you know, black is up material, has better king safety by far, and is overall safe. But that's that engine's line. Here, what instead happens is some trading. So yeah, let's look at this engine line, right? Um, Here it's basically it diverges on move 28. So here, queen takes c7, knight b3, bishop takes f1. But the real transposition that I was interested in comes later here. But anyways, this is some wild attacking play. Knight takes, and then as opposed, so pawn takes c7 is an error, and then I played out the engine line here. This g2 is the actual game. Um, but yeah, I guess let's take a look at the actual game. Um, this queen move is a crazy tactic. Basically forking these knights. This one's defended. But on bishop takes h3, queen takes c4, and or sorry, not on bishop takes h3, queen takes f3. Yeah, no, this is wild. That pawn is hanging for a while. So knight takes, and then pawn takes queen, g2. Okay, so that's the first. I guess that's the most crazy part of this game. Pawn takes d8, g2. Uh, okay. Queen takes g2. Well, the sack was there for one was one solid move. The move knight after knight takes g1. The rest it looks like black does with tempo. But still a crazy sacrifice, right? I mean, you know, uh, imagine how tactically precise this is. Like, you know, not only was this calculated, I'm sure at this point, I'm sure Nakamura had this sacrifice or had this potential sacrifice calculated by like here. Like before he moved, I'm sure it was before he moved knight h4. He was already thinking of sacrificing that queen on d8. Um, Knight takes g2, knight takes e1, queen takes g2, rook g2, bishop h3. Yep, it's a high level game. Um, but here basically white's up a piece and black doesn't black's up a piece and white doesn't really have any attacking chances. So it is probably resignable. But this is overall an excellent demonstration of how to advance a kingside attack. That said, I sort of want to slow down on this because it did basically require an error by black here. Hey, welcome, Jack. Thank you very much for joining the stream. Yeah, so basically at this point, white is still showing a really pretty positive eval. This attack is getting generated, but it hasn't yet been executed. And here, basically what this is implying is that with tactically resourceful defense, white will probably be up slightly. Uh, Much harder to do against Nakamura than it appears, but it basically is this single move, this pawn takes c7 move, which swings the eval. Although there's actually two swings here. Look, first, bishop f8, d6 is considered to be an error based on a takes b6, a takes b6, a takes b6, rook takes a1. Let's just play out this line. Uh, C takes, knight e5. I think a few people, Bren. Yeah, thank you very much for joining the stream from Reddit. Yeah, I went on Reddit today because we were a little bit short on games. I'll probably do that, in the future. I'm just sort of thinking of ways to fill all these slots. But yeah, Nakamura seems pretty good, totally. Yeah, Nakamura is a pretty damn good chess player. No joke. But so is every GM. I mean, every GM is ridiculously good. There's no two ways about it. But yeah, so today I went to Reddit and asked for some chess games to fill some of these slots. If anyone here is from Reddit, yeah, please. No, of course, guys. No, I really appreciate you guys being here. On previous streams I talk about it, but like my philosophy here is really just I want to make chess lessons free. I think that's the best for the game and the best long term thing. So I am interested in doing some free lessons, and I do this every day, and hopefully it's enjoyable and helpful. So thank you guys very much for being here, and thank you very much for sending your games. Feel free to send more. I actually feel no pressure, but I actually have a Discord where you can submit your games pretty easily. I'll just post the link for that now. It's just usually a little bit more efficient than posting on Reddit. But if you're ever interested in having more games or have more ideas for lessons, well, I usually tend to do things in like 15-minute slots. But if you say like, please tell me that, uh, you know, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, 12 games a day is a lot. But basically, if there's anyone wants to send more games for analysis or anyone wants to look at specific lesson material, please just post it on there, anything works really. Uh, but um, uh, but post it either on my Discord or find posting it on my Discord is probably the most straightforward way to get games or material suggestions to me. But at the end of the day, I'm sure everything works. Grunfeld. I was thinking Grunfeld on tomorrow morning. Um, if that's all right with you. Uh, I was thinking that if that's okay. But I do like the idea of a Grunfeld. So if that's all right, if that's all right, Jack, that's what I was planning. Um, Anyways, this is yeah. So this is pretty interesting. Overall here, uh, I was thinking basically today's deviation from straight reviewer games. I was gonna do the King's Indian defense, and but yeah, this is a crazy strong game. Is the main point. Um, these moves are really solid. But I think there's still some slight improvements. But again, this is engine assisted, so what we're really looking at we're looking at engine improvement on 2700 rated players. So I can't take really any credit for that. Um, yeah, so rook e1, knight takes g2, pawn takes c7, knight takes e1, with the queen hanging, which is a very cool tactical demonstration. But after this king side is basically opened, this position deteriorates pretty quickly. The only moves here where there was really potentially some opportunity for improvement, g4, b6, g3, king h1. But here there's some swings in the eval, so I want to just get stuck on that for a second. Um, so b3, g3, king h1, bishop f8, and d6 is an error that swings the eval. Playing out the computer line, pawn takes b6, pawn takes b6, rook takes a1, queen takes, c takes, and rook d1. And this is sort of a position that favors black, just the way that this evolved. This had a favorable trade of that rook. It was basically an undeveloped rook. It was also an undeveloped rook for white, but one with more mobility. Basically, black traded his rook where there was that basically had no mobility prior to a takes b6, and traded for this rook, which has a good amount of mobility and ability to participate potentially in the defense against this black kingside attack. Here, bishop g1. The engine thinks that knight takes g4 is a mistake. Let's play out their line. Pawn takes, bishop e3, bishop e3, rook g1. And overall, this looks like a pretty yeah, I mean, this basically does look good for white. This attack has kind of subsided, is the main point. But anyways, this ultimately ends up being a pretty good attack on the king side. So tactically best play here though, apparently, and again drawing from the computer's assessment, is as opposed to after knight h4, as opposed to rook e1, h takes g3, then f takes g3, and then the attack is a little bit tricky to continue. Not impossible. I'm sure Nakamura will find a way that is beyond our comprehension to do it. But it will be a more subsided attack, at least as dictated by the computer. But overall, this shows a good attacking plan for black. That's why this game is instructive. He basically gets his knights behind the pawns, advances the pawns, manages to deal with these queenside pawns without exposing him to too much danger, and then ultimately trades things off and sacrifices his knight on g2 in a way that's sound. That's probably the most difficult thing. My idea here was h4, h3, pawn takes g2, but that is painfully slow. Which is basically unacceptable in a grandmaster level game. So my idea, h4, h3, pawn takes g2 is way too slow. Nakamura, way faster, plays knight h4, knight takes g2, and blows the king side open that way. So that's that's pretty it's pretty dangerous. I mean, I wouldn't think to make a sacrifice that aggressive, but it works out really, really well here. I guess on king takes g2, queen d7 maybe. But some just like monstrous tactical play. Anyways, cool game, cool demonstration of success on the king side out of the king's Indian defense, and very interesting game to take a look at. Our next game here is from Stopped Clock. We will do this one now. But yeah, I'm trying to work in either basically either grandmaster level games demonstrating an opening. This one was for the King's Indian defense, or just direct opening theory here. But yeah, so f4, Grand Prix attack. We actually have a lesson on the Grand Prix attack tomorrow. Yeah, so here, okay, I just want to do this correctly. We have a lesson on the Grand Prix attack tonight, is what I was thinking. Here's another game. This is a Fischer game for Aphelion. Here I was pretty interested in looking at this. So here, assuming that this page loads, we have another Grandmaster game here. This one is basically an early extension. So this is a very early push for white in the center. Um, I guess I would say this is probably pretty dangerous for white. I think that there's an opportunity to play like d6 and this opening gets overextended. But Bobby Fischer showing a 99.3% accuracy is yeah, that's pretty solid. That should work. So anyways, let's take it from Black's perspective and show how he wins this game out of the King's Indian defense as well. King's Indian defense themed knight tonight was my thinking. King's Indian defense, and then we're gonna do a Grand Prix. We're gonna do a Grand Prix for 15 minutes, and then we're gonna get to the 3 games on Reddit, sent from Reddit at the end of the night. Um, yeah. So, anyways, this is the yeah. So this is black castling as opposed to d6. We were talking about this on yesterday's stream. How there was castling as opposed to d6, and here, basically the issue that was proposed was this early e5, which is restrictive. So we'll see in this game. But e5, knight e8, and it does look like black's development is kind of bad, right? I mean, Black's development is, all on the 8th rank. Everything's stuck, and White's center is somewhat overextended. Basically here, this is not fantastic for White. Black's development is bad, and he could be subject to attacks from like h4, h5, h6, or something along those lines. But the real issue here is that, in my mind at least, is that this structure is over advanced. It's similar to the Alekine's defense. Black is going to be able to play some well timed pawn breaks here, and ultimately put White in a situation where he's going to wind up with loose pawns in the center. Fischer, I'm sure, does this exactly in the textbook way. Pawn takes c5. There's a delayed take here, potential sacrifice for a second. But so I guess I would say here, we're looking. Let's just compare this to theory. D takes c5 is theory, and Fischer plays knight c6. I guess none of the pawns can take back the pawn, right? So on c5, so I was thinking pawn takes c5, pawn takes e5, and then pawn takes e5, and then c5. But instead, c5, d takes c5, knight c6, and that's based on the fact that neither of these pawns is takeable, right? Because the queen actually isn't defended by anything. So knight to c6 is, and the sacrifice of the d6 pawn is a key part of this. Knight to g3, bishop to e6, knight f3, queen c7. And here, it's kind of an interesting situation. Black's going to regain his missing pawn. White's not going to play pawn takes e5, knight takes e5, and then queen takes e5 or bishop takes e5 with forward moving pieces for black, extra development. Let's take a look. I mean, the truth of the matter is these classic games do have bigger swings in the eval. It's pretty, it's pretty difficult to play in an extremely accurate play in the opening without having the computer assistance available first. So g5, e4, pawn takes, pawn takes, pawn takes, and black's way up is the point. So c5, knight c6, takes, knight e4, and here actually pawn takes e5 is takeable, which I think sort of interesting. So pawn takes e5, queen takes d8, knight takes d8, and black has regained his material that way. Sort of curious to see why that's not considered good, because queen takes d8, knight takes d8, bishop to c5. Okay, because it loses in exchange. That's a good explanation. Because I was looking at, so pawn takes, knight e4, and then I was like, okay, well, pawn takes e5 here, and black gets back his pawn and gets advanced pieces on e5, like probably a good post for the knight for at least a second, or maybe a post for the bishop. But instead, on takes e5 here, queen takes d8, knight takes d8, bishop to c5. Brutal. Yep. Fischer's got some. Uh, I mean, these really high level games are tough to see. Yeah. So bishop to c5 for sure. Knight to c6, pawn to d6, and yeah, no, it's yeah, that so all right, so that gives a demonstration of why my first instinct is you know, not correct in that situation. But it's cool, those tactics, it's amazing how the computer finds those tactics though. Bishop f5, knight g3, bishop e6, knight f3. And black's up. I mean, this is a good situation. Queen b1, pawn takes, f5, yeah, e4, okay. Pawn takes, f5, f4. Yeah, basically development for black. This is an interesting position. Um, I guess it's looks better for black, but I would have to count out exactly, why. White's pawn structure is worse, okay, like definitively. This e6 pawn is going to get lost for sure. And black's king safety is kind of bad. That said, this is a big advantage, right? Like, this is a 4.3 pawn advantage two, um, with white down two pawns, right? Or no, sorry, one pawn. White down one pawn. But this is considered to be a big positional lead. So rook e8, rook e6 is probably a given. Yeah, white's up a pawn, right? So what's crazy about this is that white's up a pawn, but uh white's up a pawn, but black has this huge eval advantage. Uh and I guess, white's position is pretty loose. Like, this e6 pawn will fall, so I guess we can, kind of I guess I'm okay claiming equality in material here. But still, you know, and then white's pawn structure is worse. So I could give, like, white like a -1 here or something. But I think the engine is really predicting some big problems with king safety here, and I guess we'll see those play out probably in the next couple moves. Bishop to f3, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, and then the big tactical win. Queen takes a4, or sorry, queen. Wait, what? Queen takes f4. Oh, here's like the beautiful tactic, right? This is pretty crazy. Queen takes f4, wins. Um, monster. Yeah, I mean, awesome tactics. So Fischer wins. Fischer wins. Fischer has won a lot. But yeah, yeah, no, that's pretty crazy. That's a cool game. But it does show King's Indian defense played a little bit differently. So we basically have spent most of the time looking at King's Indian defense, where advancement has been made on the king side aggressively against a castled white king. But instead, this is white aggressively overextending. And black's play here is basically based on a reaction, not an attack. Which happens again in these flank openings. Pawn takes, knight e4, bishop f5, knight g3. Um, but black is in good shape already. I mean, this overextension is a problem. We were looking at it yesterday where we said castling is okay and all this big pawn structure for white is really okay because black plays d6 and then c5 and undermines the pawns in the center. And Yeah, at the end of the day, this really is pretty strong. White doesn't really get much play. There's some good tactical play here and some good positional maneuvering too. But basically, almost no play for white. So if you want to take, if we're interested in looking at a game where basically white takes a position straight from overextension on move 6 to a black win, this is a pretty good demonstration. Knight c6, sacrifice the d6 pawn temporarily, get better development for your pieces. So bishop to f5, and then pawn takes d5, pawn takes e5, pawn takes e5, threatens to win the pawn back immediately. Um, Uh, Black moves back the bishop to avoid doubling the f pawns. But already here, huge positive eval for Black. This is really strong. In the same way, this kind of classical pre-computer e4 openings. I mean, they really are kind of amazing how cleanly these tactical wins look. Uh, Queen c7 is slightly inaccurate apparently, but um, anyways, f takes e6 as opposed to queen takes e4 is considered to be a mistake. But again, by this point, it's basically decided. There's almost no play for white at all in this game. It demonstrates why d6 and c5 are really the win. Pawn takes d6, knight e4, and black's in good shape. Yeah, not much play. But anyways, this shows a win out of the King's Indian defense, not because of any really like King's Indian defense type general features or themes, but just how to win against White's overextension against the King's Indian defense. This is a good demonstration of how flank openings play against central expansion openings. This with d6 and c5, the white center completely fell apart, and Black got good opening lines both for his fianchettoed bishop and for this bishop on f5. It's kind of crazy. It got really dangerous really fast, and with kind of a mix of tactics and just general like strategic pressure. Good win for Fischer, no doubt about it. Very interesting. Uh, cool. And then he closes with this awesome tactic at the end. The game was already won, so I not a huge the tactic is pretty, but the game was won. Hey, welcome, Adriana. Thanks for joining the stream. Yeah. So the next one I was gonna do a look at a game from or we were gonna take a look at the Grand Prix from Natisse, and then we have three games in a row. I think all of them are games that were sent from Reddit. So if I confirmed that we were looking at your game from uh, if we were considering looking at your game from Reddit, and I confirmed that we were doing it at 6:05, that'll be at the end of the stream, probably from I'd say about 7:55 to about 6:55 to about 8:40 Eastern. I didn't forget about you. We're just that was the order of the slots for me. But thank you very much for sending your games in from Reddit. It seems to really work in terms of getting games to analyze here. Anyways, uh, this one I'm gonna do kind of freeform. I was thinking like no, I don't have any demonstrative games or anything like that. I was just thinking we could take a look at kind of the main lines in the Sicilian Grand Prix attack. So here, Grand Prix can be played against multiple openings. Also f4 can be played on move 2, but this allows d5, and it's possible to avoid kind of some of the mainline Grand Prix theory with that move order. So say here knight c6 f4. So this is the Grand Prix attack. We were talking about the Grand Prix attack in an earlier stream because we were considering basically the strength of bishop to c4 in the Sicilian, and it's significantly stronger in the Grand Prix Sicilian, because bishop to c4 can be supported with f5. The point of bishop c4 is not control of the center. It helps a little sometimes, this d5, but e6 actually shuts down the bishop's control of d5 pretty effectively. Instead, the value of bishop on c4 is generally to attack the f7 pawn, which is the weakest point in Black's starting position. So here, in the Sicilian, when you're deciding whether or not to play bishop to c4, the position of these pawns on e4 and f4 are actually very relevant to how well bishop to c4 will work as an attack. So that's just something to consider. G6, knight f3. It has some similarities to the King's Gambit. I mean, it doesn't have e5, but White has kind of the similarly open, h4 square, which is probably more effective as a threat than an actual play. It doesn't actually happen that often in neither of the openings. But White's playing out of the kind of King's Gambit type open king side. It's a little it's something to it basically means that White has to be careful almost the entire game. Bishop g7, bishop to b5. So here, basically, the bishop didn't play to c4; it played to b5. And here, knight d4 is by far the most popular move. This is a situation that happens a lot in the Grand Prix attack. Many different Grand Prix attacks involve the knight to d4 supported by the bishop on g7. How does White best respond to this? We played a game earlier where a problem occurred because there was a bishop on g4, supporting this basically a bishop on g4 and a knight on d4, and the combination of those was bad for White. You know, basically that shouldn't that position type of position should be avoided. Either knight takes d4 before bishop to g4 gets played, or the most popular line, the knight just takes b5, knight takes b5, d5, and that threat isn't a thing. But that was one thing we basically came to the conclusion that having that multiple threat on that knight is pretty bad. Doubling the g pawn on the recapture of the knight on f3 is generally something that White can't really White can't do particularly well on that. So e takes d5, a6, knight c3, knight f6, d4, and basically White is I think White's better here. This e5 pawn will fall, but White has good control over e5, and in this main line, these pawns are separated, and they're not basically they're sort of isolated in the sense that c2 can't be played. This d4 pawn at least, but overall, this is not really something. This is not a position that White needs to be too worried about, especially with the most common recapture here. So say White plays like queen e2 or knight e5. Say knight e5, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, queen takes, and then c3 can be played. I was just looking for a situation in which the knight takes on d5. This structure is pretty good for White. I don't think there's any real problems here. This knight is posted. F6 might be playable to kick out the knight, but it's not like super dangerous, I don't think. Think basically here f6, knight f3, and black ends up with a weaker king side. But yeah, anyways, it's just an idea. Grand Prix, castles, knight b5, knight b5, d5. This early d5, I think, is pretty. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty strong. It's a generally accepted Sicilian equalizing move. Sicilian, if in the Sicilian, the d5 can counter, so pawn takes, and then queen takes. This pawn structure is not particularly. Oh, well, I guess queen can't take immediately because of knight c7. But if there's a trade on d5, this pawn on d2, basically it's a good way for black to expand in the center. Is the main point. Um, uh, Black basically doesn't play a center pawn move in the Sicilian. So the center pawn move that Black generally plays in the Sicilian is d5. If Black wants to challenge the center directly, that's normally how he does it. It can be favorable, and particularly in non-aggressive Sicilian lines. So like e4, c5, g3, d5 is not an uncommon move order. But yeah, so d4, c4, knight e5, and White's in pretty good position. Knight takes, queen takes, c3, and overall, this looks like a pretty equalizing, playable position for White. Okay, so let's look at a few other main lines in the Sicilian Grand Prix. So f4 it takes us to the Grand Prix. So there are a few responses here. Responses are g6, e6, d6. Three options here. All of them are playable. Looks like d6 has the best, the best outcome for White. I'm gonna play d6 because I'm sort of curious about how playable bishop to c4 becomes here. We were talking a little bit about when bishop to c4 is playable in the Sicilian. Um, I sort of came to the conclusion that it's not particularly good, but I know for a fact that the main line here in the Sicilian Grand Prix is bishop to c4. This is, it's relatively close to equal. It doesn't offer white, great opportunities, but here, bishop to c4, bishop to g7, and this f7 pawn definitely is getting attacked. Castles, e6, knight f6. Okay, yeah, eventually, white is, white does have a lead in development. Black's game will probably center around a good play, basically a good timing of knight to d4, a6 and b5 are played here probably. But overall, I think I think basically this is this is interesting. Because I do think white has an advantage in space and development. But the weakness on d4 is pretty apparent here. Um, I would guess that knight d4 is a relatively common move in the next 2 or 3 moves. D6, d3, knight ge7, queen e1, and knight d4, by the way, was always playable. Castles, f5, or say yeah, is d4 still possible here from white? Good question. I mean, I don't think so. I think d4, or so d4 basically stops being playable at this point. I think basically the Sicilian, the g6 against this Grand Prix attack leaves this weakness on d4. D4 is never really playable because it's so well supported by black. So d4, and then here, kind of weird that the only opening is e6, but okay, whatever. Pawn takes d4 here is definitely good for black. Basically knight can't retake, and that's going to be a pawn that's going to be valuable for black. I don't know. You probably support it with d6 and e5, I think. But d4 stops being playable as soon as the bishop gets to g7. Part of this is because the Sicilian is closed. But yeah, so bishop g7 and d4 unfortunately is not, is no longer playable for white. White basically has to play it as a closed structure. Knight d4 also very naturally goes to d4. You know, on the retake, it can be interesting. I mean, I think that sometimes there's a dispute as to whether the knight should. So say a knight takes d4 here. Should black take with the knight or with the pawn, or the bishop or the pawn? And the answer is the bishop or the pawn, and knight e2. But it doesn't disrupt castling for white. The pawn is, the pawn's going to end up being supported pretty well, I think. But this is not going to be an issue. I don't think. I think black will hold on to that d4 pawn. It's not an overextended pawn that's about to get clipped. Anyways. Bishop to b5, knight to d4, castles, knight takes b5, knight takes b5, knight d5, or d5. E takes, queen takes d4, not playable here, right, because of the fork. a6, knight c3, knight f6. And here, white's got an overextended pawn that's going to get lost. It'll be probably pretty close to equal. The c5 pawn will also get lost, but knight takes c3, king d8, and yeah, I think basically black's in pretty good shape here. Let's look at the eval, but yeah, slightly better for black. C5 pawn is weak, not worth as much as a regular pawn, and he has a bishop pair. So yeah, I mean that gives a sense of some of the kind of main lines here. Okay. Here, I guess, yeah. So I was interested in seeing. So this line in particular was the one that I was the most interested in, because it definitely involves bishop to c4 is the most chosen option, like right here, bishop c4, bishop to g7, castles, e6, and this bishop to c4 doesn't have its normal thing. But the f5, f5 will be played in a lot of positions like this, either on this move or the next move. It's already the second most popular move. But the attacking threat from the bishop's going to be supported by f5. This e6 is not going to work given that it's a Grand Prix attack. This basically this this position is going to f5 is going to be an effective attack here, and the bishop will be on an effective diagonal. D3, knight ge7, and I was thinking, yeah, I guess f5. Now with black able to take like e takes and then knight takes, f5 becomes less playable. But let's look at f5 here. Pawn takes f5, d3, knight ge7, queen e1, h6. Um, you know, Now basically at the price of this pawn, and on a retake would be awkward here for black. I mean, basically, bishop takes f5 would lead to like knight to d5 potentially, or h3 g4. But this attacking line on f7 is open. F5 has created this, basically the strength of the bishop on c4. Against e6, this bishop's not particularly effective, but now, for the cost of the f pawn, this f7 is getting attacked, and the bishop's back on a reasonably good diagonal. D3, knight ge7, queen e1, h6, queen g3. Okay. But yeah, this is pretty interesting. Bishop takes, rook takes. And I'm guessing it's probably a little bit better for black. But white leads in development. He has a lot of attacking chances on the f file. Castling looks pretty dangerous. Like the king safety, black's king safety could suffer. It's pretty close to equality. And white is down a pawn, by the way. So this pawn basically is not this is at the price of that pawn. So white's piece play is better, but there's a material imbalance here. And pawn takes f5 isn't really playable. But this trade is interesting. So this for example is a well supported bishop to c4 in a Sicilian opening. Queen e1, castles, f5. Again, this time post castling, looking at looking at potential expansions of the available diagonal for the light squared white bishop. C4, pawn takes, f6, and it's a pretty open position. I guess this diagonal's pretty strong. I don't know, bishop g5, f6, rook d1. White's in good shape. It's this looks good for white. So in this case, f5 really plays out well. How does black better optimize here? This was all basically top engine moves. C4 takes f6. Kind of surprised f6 is such an obvious tactic here, but I guess it allows you to play knight takes e4 with tempo. Bishop to g7, bishop g5. And here it's but I think basically here it's pretty good for white. He's got a big spatial advantage. Where does this flip? I guess I think this demonstrates sort of that the most popular move here, c4, is at odds. I mean, and c4 is like legit the most popular move for black here. This is a 70% play. Is at odds with what the computer is recommending. Basically here on the evals, if you play the second most popular move, d takes c4, position's close to equal. But instead, the main line here, c4, is basically bad for black. So interesting. We've gotten into a few different situations where the computer is recommending something different than computers recommending something different than the engine. This is an example of that. Those types of things I think are pretty, could potentially be useful, depending on how well your opponent knows book lines. It basically, what would a very well prepared opponent play? Would they just play the rote memorization line, or would they come to the same conclusion that c4 is too loose? I don't know. But it's a high level master question. But always interesting to see when like on this position, the 75% move is not the correct one as dictated by this computer. Does that create an opportunity? I don't know, but it's kind of an interesting situation. I just wanted to close on this Grand Prix attack. So we explored Grand Prix with Bishop C4 because I know that people were interested in that line. Um, but we'll just look at a few other options here. Uh, so here, say Bishop to B5. Options are Knight D. Or I guess let's go even earlier. Let's look at the three main options here: G6, E6, D6. D6 is the one that enables Bishop to C4. Bishop to C4 is the least playable in this option. Uh, G6, it's probably also pretty unplayable. So basically that points to something that I think Tarash was talking about earlier, where basically the value of the bishop on C4, bishop C4 is more playable given D6. It's not extremely playable given that E5 hasn't been played, but the best opportunities out of the Grand Prix to play bishop to C4 are out of D6. And let's just look at the most common line: bishop to G7. Here, bishop to B5 is an option for white. Bishop to C4 is a distant second. Looking at bishop B5, knight D4, castles, knight takes B5, knight takes B5, and then black has a number of options. So D5, D6, knight F6, A6. All basically a five different passable options for black. In this position, black's strongest piece is this bishop on G7. White has slightly better piece play. D3, will open this diagonal, and overall, it's pretty. I think it's pretty solid. This is a situation in which it's close to equality. Probably not ideal for white, but a playable opening for either side. Anyways, interesting. Thank you very much for that idea, and I hope that that goes over the Grand Prix that you're interested in, Natisse. And if you have any more opening ideas like that, you could even say the Grand Prix again. We'll go over different lines. I just knew that people were interested in Grand Prix with Bishop to C4, so I was focused on that one. But yeah, feel free to volunteer ideas. Like, always cool to get to explore a new opening or learn some new lines in it. And I hope that was sort of consistent with what you were interested in. If not, recommend it again, and we'll look at some other Grand Prix lines. But I think that was instructive and kind of helpful to explain the basic concepts of especially the question when or when not is bishop to C4 playable relative to like other options: bishop B5, bishop B2. Cool. Interesting. Now on to the games from Reddit. Thank you guys very much for being here. Thank you guys very much for submitting the games. I hope that analysis wasn't too drawn out or boring for you guys. I really appreciate you guys being here and participating in the stream. So I know that Black is playing, basically of the three games from Reddit, unless you guys correct me, all three of them were playing from Black's perspective. I haven't looked them over because I was in class most of today, but it looks like this one's out of the French exchange. And trades off into a bishop versus knight endgame, which is ultimately won by Black. But an interesting game. So let's look at it. Okay, French exchange is an opening that I like. I play this as white sometimes. It's usually better as a surprise attack because I think, objectively speaking, Black has pretty good chances of drawing. But there are winning lines in the French exchange. And it's also very useful as a potential drawing tool if you're in like the last round and you're interested in a draw against like a higher rated player. The French exchange actually can be a useful resource in that case. But anyways, your opponent has played it. So let's take a look. Knight f3, knight f6, bishop d3, and then the most I guess French exchange is going to be dictated, I think, less by theory than some potential French lines. But the most popular move here was bishop to d6. Second most popular, bishop to e7. The reason why this is because, and what was played here was knight to c6. What I think is a big piece of this is, basically knight to c6 in many openings, but primarily in the French and in queen's pawn openings. can be restrictive. In this case, very natural challenging of the center for black is c5. Basically, black is interested in getting more center control here. Here, it's very close to symmetrical, so it's not like there's a huge difference. But a way that black can kind of create inequality here and end up basically creating a situation in which he may have the initiative is with a move like c5. So for that reason, knight c6 is actually pretty far down on the list of playable moves. They both they focus on the symmetrical d6. So in general, I think let's look at the analysis too. But something like c5 shows about 0.15, but I'm guessing yeah, this is gonna knight c6 is kind of objectively it limits black's options basically. Instead, black should play probably c5 and then knight c6. Knight c6 is a straightforward move. It makes a lot of sense. It's a developing move in an opening where both sides are really trying to get developed as quickly as possible. But it goes against this kind of general opening concept, challenging the d4 pawn with the c pawn. This happens a lot in queen's pawn games. It happens basically on the white side of the queen's gambit. You create a similar kind of pressure as black here. It's basically like a queen's gambit type pressure. So knight c6, castles, bishop b6, bishop g5, and basically black's developing here. White has an advantage, largely linked to his opening first move initiative. Both sides are trying to develop as quickly as possible, but one asymmetry here, and one thing that I think is kind of difficult for black's position is having this knight on c6, and the inability to play a move like c3 here. There's restrictions on the c7 pawn now, and I think those probably were not ideal. Anyways, this is sort of tricky. That knight c6 move. So as long as we're sticking to sort of a direct like lesson format, like I think knight c6 from a conceptual perspective is something that you may want to revisit. The knight naturally goes to c6, but after that pawn has made its way forward on the c file. Otherwise, just standard opening developing moves: bishop to e7, bishop to d6. Knight to c6 is not terrible, but I think it's just from a positional perspective, it will reduce black's ability to challenge in the center relative to options where c5 still remains an available choice. So like castles here, castles, bishop g5, and I'm just going to go through these lines until c5 becomes the first choice. But this c5 push is something that's generally pretty desirable for black. It's the third most popular option here, but knight c6 restricts it. Anyways, that's something. So that's an idea. I wouldn't say that it's bad, but I think it's something to consider, or at least have a full understanding of the kind of consequences of. Knight takes d3, queen takes d3, queen takes d8, and here basically we're in a position that's sort of equal. Pawn structure is symmetrical, basically. Black has a better minor piece. What plans do you want to generate here as black? It's a little bit tricky, right? So I don't have. I mean, it will take me a second to come up with like a really good plan here. I don't think black has enough to start a real kingside attack. An interesting idea would be like, h5, queen e7, or queen h6. Like h5, queen h6, g5 would be interesting. I don't know if that would be good. I guess we can see. But overall, I think that's an idea that one could come up with in this relatively equal position. By the way, simplifying is considered to be good for black here. There's a big shift in eval after queen f3. The shift in eval is because, forcing an endgame here is considered to be good for black. I'm not sure if it's sufficient to win, but having that minor piece in what is basically having a bishop versus knight minor piece advantage in what's basically an open position is favorable to is favorable to black. So queen f3, queen takes f3, knight takes f3, and black is better. You know, not winning or not necessarily winning already, but better. I'd be tempted to play like f6 followed by king d7, something like that. But this minor piece could potentially be very helpful to black to win this game. Anyways, bishop f5, b4. Now so by the way, the game position was black trading off. Um, yeah, I guess that is probably objectively the best. So the plan in that case would be, trade off, accept that the drawing chances have gotten higher, and take your better minor piece into an end game where take your better minor piece into an end game that trades off bishop versus knight. That's an idea. There are other plans that are probably less likely to draw, like queen g6 instead. And that's relatively equal in terms of eval, but queen g6 declining the trade of queens. But objectively, it probably is better to just accept a slightly more drawish endgame position and try to win the endgame, win the minor piece and rook endgame. Anyways, queen g6, queen g3, and then the pawn trades. Here I would be really tempted to play queen takes g3 because unlike before, this will mess up White's kingside pawn structure and also not bring his knight forward. So now I think queen takes is a more appealing move than it was taking on f3. Here, rook d2. Now, black's up a pawn. So that was a pretty quick win of a pawn. King f1, I guess, was probably kind of an error here. Everything forced the king back. And as was knight b3. Rook d1 was better, I think. Although maybe not. Sort of looking for what White's best play is here. Knight f3 as opposed to b3. I guess there's sort of some kind of skewer risk of rook to a3. Yeah, makes sense. But anyways, either any of these moves, basically after bishop to d3, king f1, bishop to d3, king to g1, back to where it was, and then rook to e2. Everything is going to win at least a pawn here. So now that was great. That was so quick how black was able to solidify his material advantage based off of the better minor piece. Now black has some real plans. I think bishop b6, a5 is going to cause some real problems for white. In addition to having the potential to get a passed pawn really quickly here for black, the king is going to be more active for black here and support the pawn as it advances. b5 was, I don't think, a good move. I guess the eval will confirm, but yeah, b5 is not a good idea. Black has the opportunity to create a passed pawn here. The game is getting closer to being won by black. Like, this is not super distant. If you can make the material a passed pawn, then you should do it. And just from a pawn structure perspective, b6, a5 creates a passed pawn on the a file. b5 basically doesn't. a5 now, best case on a5 is a trade of pawns here, and that's not. So interesting. Endgame play here, I think is going to be my sort of second. I think basically between this knight c6, which I think is a correctable opening move. I think the middle game was all really pretty solid for black. I don't think there was, there probably were some inefficiencies, but nothing really big to change. But I do think that this is the second thing that I would focus on. Is just how to how to manage your pawns in an endgame. b6 a5 here I think is really good. This creates a passed pawn. Especially with your king on this side of the board and this king, having to catch up to it basically on this side of the board. I think b6 a5 giving you the passed pawn is going to be really tough for white to handle. So say, I mean, the engine's suggesting crazy moves like knight f1 here or something like that, just trying to change the maneuvering. But say king f1, a5, pawn takes, and among other things, this square, and this square are all occupied by black. So I think white will have a difficult time finding a way to defend against that pawn, if it's possible at all. I'm not sure. Um, Dangerous. So yeah, so that's my second. I think that's my second takeaway on this game. B6, a5. Pass the pawn, start pushing the pawn. Keep it defended by this bishop potentially, or the king. But that is a better way to handle the advancement of this pawn structure. B6, a5. Otherwise, it's pretty. This move provides a lot more chances for white to equalize, and means that this a pawn can't ever get through. So that I guess is my second takeaway from this game, which was largely pretty well played. I mean, nothing super glaring. Um, okay, so yeah, so now you get a pass pawn on the d file, which will probably still win actually. But it's much more of a difficult win than the b6 win. B6, a5, and you have a pawn advancing as distant from the king as possible with some support and some of the good defensive squares for the knight blocked. I mean, you have a pawn advantage, so you are going to get a pawn here pretty much or you are going to get a pass pawn pretty much no matter what. But you might as well make it the a pawn as opposed to the d pawn. There's it's more time consuming among other things for the white king to get all the way over there. Whereas the black king's just sort of moving forward. They're moves that he would probably do. You want to be doing regardless. Um, so the a pawn forces a lot more lateral moves, a lot of more blown tempo for white, and for that reason, b6 pushing the a file for pawn forward here is better. Pass the a pawn. And that's the maneuver by which you would do it is b6 and a5. Um, but yeah, overall, a good game. Sorry, I just want to play. I guess I'll play just to the end, but this pawn, all right, cool, good pawn play. Like you move that pass pawn on the d file all the way forward and win all the material and win. So yeah, so that worked. That worked too. But I think more efficiently, I think it's great. It's good job winning. That's the most important thing. You walked away from the game with a win, and that's always good. But I think I would say the most important thing there is evaluating how or which pawn to pass. Here you had the opportunity to get the a pawn. So in this game, I think it's pretty good. Good play, nothing super glaring. But here, I would encourage you to reconsider knight c6. As a general concept, knight blocking the c7 pawn. When there are pawns on d4, when there's a pawn on d4 that could be challenged by the c pawn, that's a move that should be done kind of deliberately. You one of black's real freeing moves is potentially c5, bishop takes c5. But yeah, after knight c6 blocking c7, and that's no longer an option available to black. So I would just consider that and see how you can basically basically at least consider the ideas behind not playing knights to c6 there. Knight to c6 is a developing move, but one with some downsides. Bishop to d6, symmetrical here, is a developing move with no real discernible downsides to it. So in this case, I would say bishop to d6 is safer. Bishop to e7 is probably safer. And in general, don't have the same issues. Or you could just challenge directly with c5. That's also an acceptable play, and then you could move c6 the next move. But overall, those are the two takeaways that I see as the most clear. I think basically this makes for more awkward development. So I would encourage to reconsider that development and maybe develop a different piece. And in this endgame, you want to be developing, or you want to be passing the pawn that is the most difficult for the king to handle. And here that's done with b6 a5. But overall, yeah, solid game. I really appreciate you sending it, and I hope this was helpful. And yeah, thanks a lot. Very happy to do the analysis, and please send more games if you're interested. Thank you very much for joining the stream, and really appreciate your participation. It makes my life, better to have a lot of material to work with. And thank you very much for being here. And thanks for contributing the material to the stream. Awesome. All right, on to the next game. This one is also from Reddit, and it's also from Black's perspective. So let's just do this here. Uh, okay. Oops. Sorry about that. Um, okay. All right. So this was also from Black's perspective. This is Rhett Kelly versus Bren Balone. And let's see. So this is against c4. I haven't seen this game, so I'm gonna have to go through and play it quickly. Looks like a very early queen a4, and then yeah, cool, nice mate. Um, awesome. Cool. Yeah. Thank you for being here, Bren. This is interesting. I think it's going to give a good opportunity to take a look at this unusual opening line. I don't know what to do against it. And it managed to take out the engine already. Um, interesting. So here, yeah, Queen A4. That is very early. Generally against these really early queen moves, what you want to do is probably just develop in a normal fashion. The queen often gets in the way. In this particular case, probably not, because the knight was not going to go to a4. But the movement of the queen in the opening is often not a great idea. And, developing in a straightforward way, and at least at the very least taking advantage of your development of your pieces quicker than the side that's played the queen is the way to go with this. In the Scandinavian, one of the things that's a good strategy is playing like knight c6 against the queen on d4, because it allows you to develop the knight, and white has to burn another move with or black has to burn another move with moving the queen, so you can get a free development there. Here, just yeah, I would say just develop. I think that's probably what you do. But if in doubt, just develop pieces normally and play chess. H4 is another pretty offbeat move. I would still castle here. I don't think white has enough pieces supporting to really attack well. H5, knight takes h5, maybe rook takes h5. Sometimes that can be a playable line, especially in like the Leningrad Dutch. But here, h4 is a very very early attack, and you'll have many opportunities to sidestep it. A3 is disconnected from h4. I don't really think that white is playing well here. If you just keep developing pieces here, I think you're going to be in good shape. H4 mixed with A3 is a confusing thing for white to do here. It doesn't seem like a consistent plan. Anyways, yeah, D6 is okay. I don't know. I might have gone with knights. I don't know, maybe knight c6, but then we run into the same problems as before with the c pawn going out before the knight. I might play c5 here. Um, and the engine is saying that you want to play e5 and challenge the center immediately. But I like d6. D6 makes sense. Basically it supports a later c5 and e5, and also allows your bishop the diagonal that it needs for development. So d6 makes a lot of sense. I think that's fine. The bishop checks the queen. Okay, cool. Yeah, so that makes sense. Basically you developed a piece with free tempo, so that's good, and one of the kind of key components of a response to an early queen move. E5, knight c3, knight c6, And black is just generally better. I mean, it's sort of equal. White hasn't made any like catastrophic errors or anything. But black is showing better here. I'd be tempted to play bishop f5. The computer instead says knight takes h5, which looks like it introduces some practical compensation for white. Um, but that said, you can respond to rook takes h5 with f5. So okay, f5 here. Yeah. And white's black's still fine, but white is getting some practical comp. Black needs to play pretty carefully here, though. It's the type of position where you're fine, but a tactical misstep could be dangerous. E4, I like. That makes a lot of sense to me, actually. Yeah, E4 is the best move. Cool. Yeah, this looks like a really good way to play it. Actually, I think that was a good find in terms of that move. Uh, Knight to E5, knight to D3 looks like a good idea for black. This makes sense. I don't know if you play H6 first, but either's probably fine. Um, yeah, no, I think black's playing well here. These are conceptually good, good moves. E5, setting up that knight b5 d3 outpost though, I think is a good positional construction. Um, that seems unnecessary. Uh, okay, black is winning. Yeah, awesome. Honestly, where can black this is a well played game, great tactics, quick win. Definitely cool. It's awesome to see a good win, and that's always good. Where can black improve here? I think probably the opening is the best chance. There's no opening theory here, but maybe e5, I guess. E5 is probably a little bit more challenging. It basically sets up an opportunity to play rook e8, which is going to be the natural square for the rook here. D4, pawn takes d4, pawn takes d4, and then maybe rook e8 immediately, maybe not, but the rook naturally goes to the e file in this situation. Um, so yeah, I guess I would say maybe that's a little. So e5 is what the engine recommends. The rest of the position, I don't know. D6 may be a little bit slow. Rook e8 is interesting. I sort of like c5 though. I'm kind of curious about c5. Um, because c5, I like knight c6 here too, but because it's a developing move. I definitely think the overarching plan here is get black developed as quickly as possible. But I'd say c5 here maybe. C5, knight c3, knight c6, and here basically black has a pretty good, well-developed position. Queen a4 is kind of misplaced. A3 doesn't make sense in the context of h4, or h4 doesn't make sense in the context of a3. It's just especially those two rook moves together are sort of disorganized. Um, Not saying that c5 is better than d6. They're both good. But here I think I would play c5 or e5. But I sort of like c5 here. Now it's a much more normal English position. The queen's not really supposed to be there. And if we just go through I guess there's no opening book here, but knight c6, bishop e2, e6, d5 coming. It's pretty good. Maybe the same thing as before with h5, knight takes, pawn takes. But especially I actually, so I'm gonna sort of think a little bit more about this. I think c5 is actually a better idea here, right? This looks like a good plan, and the reason why I think it's a good plan is because it locks up the queen over here. The queen can correct this with d1 and h5 and stuff, but basically c5 really indicates that this queen is misplaced on a4. Knight develops naturally to c6, d6 gets played, bishop to f5 gets played, but basically, the queen a4 move doesn't make much sense in the context of a kingside attack. So that's why I'm leaning c5. just to basically have symmetrical control of the center here, and not really basically locks things up over here. These moves, a3 and queen a4 feel wasted if white's plan is basically to start an early kingside attack. Anyways, bishop to e2, e6, d5 is I think coming for black. And overall, black's got a good position. Um, not as good a position as black ended up getting out of d6. That was a pretty crushing win, so I don't know how much I have to improve on. But just in terms of other potential thoughts here on d6, e5 and c5 are more challenging from black for white. And then on those a3 queen a4 looks kind of misplaced. Anyways, this works fine. Black's development is good. This gets a little risky, or not risky, but it becomes a situation where black needs to be sort of careful. But overall, e5, e4 I thought made a lot of sense. Good move. And followed by knight to e5. And yeah, I think basically, black plays a better game and deserves to win. Some errors here. I mean, king f2 as opposed to king d1. But yeah, the only move of here I can really even pick much of a, I think, white played some unusual moves, and a3 doesn't make sense in context with h4, but the only move I could really even focus on improving here is this d6. It's a little bit passive. E5 or c5, I think. C5, basically transposed it into an English with a misplaced queen seems like a pretty straightforward way to secure at least kind of a small advantage for black. Those are the moves that I like the most. The engine's saying rook e8. Nah, I mean, e5 or c5, turn it into recognizable English with the queen misplaced. That's sort of the way that I would play this. Otherwise, awesome game. Really good tactics. Cool one to get to show. And yeah, good win. Awesome. Good tactics. Thank you very much for sending the game, Bren. I hope the analysis of those center pawns is at least somewhat helpful. You sent me a good game, a good win, so I don't have a tremendous amount of guidance to give you. Did most of the things right, and you won as a result. But overall, yeah, solid. But my thematic thinking there is turn it into since you can turn it into a recognizable position with some misplaced pieces. That in general just can't really be bad for you. That English with wasted moves for white is a good outcome for black. Would be my takeaway. So d6 and holding back center control moves is a plan where I would compare it to the idea of transposing it into an English and just sort of think about it that um, you know basically mainline English is about equal. So if you do mainline English but white has misplaced pieces, then that's got to be a little bit better, right? Yeah, I don't know how often you're going to see Queen A4. It was an interesting try, but you really did capitalize at the end of the day on these moves, which were kind of disconnected in relation to each other. Like, was White playing to the queen side or the king side here? Um, he's attempting both early. So you capitalized well on those ideas, Bren, and yeah, I hope that was at least somewhat helpful. Thank you very much for sending the game. Please feel free to send more either on the Discord or on Reddit or however. I'm always happy to look things over. I'm also happy to look over any other lesson material you'd like to see. I get a lot of learning out of these lessons. So yeah, please come back. Or I hope you're interested in coming back. And yeah, hope to see you again in the future. Thank you very much for submitting the game and giving us material to go over today. Cool. So the final game for the night, also from Reddit, is this one. And it's another game sent by Black here, who is here. That is Kai Dude. Okay, we will open that up. Um, and yeah, let's look at this. I haven't seen this game. Karokon for Black. Uh, double F pawns. And interesting. Okay. Okay. Cool. Interesting situation. Let's look at this. All right. So it's a Karokon for Black and a Karokon line with C5. I always wonder about this line because I'm like, isn't it sort of inefficient to play C6 and then play C5? But nah, it works. It's a main line. So, but I'm always like, how does you know, Black managed to play the C pawn twice and not remain behind on time, and it's sort of because the E5 pawn is similarly unproductive. Uh, but Knight F3, Bishop to G4, um, H3. Okay. Main line here is C4 challenging Black in the center. Um, basically, this is Caro-Kann in French, particularly the French. Sort of depends on getting these pawns off the board for White. In the French specifically, uh, basically if White can maintain those pawns D4 and E5 in the center, he tends to win. And then if Black can disrupt that center, he tends to either equalize or win. So basically a lot of play comes from the move C5 here. The Caro-Kann, that's less rigidly true, but it's basically basically accurate. Here pawn takes F3. Okay, so this is a position where I think Black is already better. Uh, how basically should Black exploit this? It's kind of a tough question. Um, those uh, those doubled F pawns are a problem. So if you trade everything off and go to an end game, they're going to be a liability for White. Uh, you can easily play like E6 and G6, and those F pawns are almost worthless. Um, so how does Black capitalize on this? I think E6 is probably what I would play first. Basically making the bishop take c5 retake easy. Knight c6 is also good. Knight e7 is also, or e6 and then knight e7 is good. I don't think you would have to play h6 first. Uh, but I think definitely, getting the bishop on the f8 a3 diagonal is probably the good idea. So e6 a3 queen b6. All right. So here Black is showing an advantage, and actually I'm just going to take it back because I'm curious about this. Here I'm sure Black is already also winning. Um, Engine suggesting knight c6, but I like e6. E6 is what's played. Solid. Uh, okay. Knight c6 was preferred to queen b6, but again, and I think Black can just sort of develop very naturally here. I would play a6. Yeah, so here's an opportunity for Black to win a pawn, right? Or close to it. I guess bishop e3. But okay, so say a6 here. A6 and bishop anything else anywhere along this diagonal loses the d4 pawn immediately. So bishop takes c6 is forced, knight takes c6, and now bishop to e3 hangs the d4 or defends the d4 pawn but hangs the b2 pawn. So Black has already won a pawn here. Is the end result of this on a6? Either way, either the d4 or the b2 pawn is going to get lost. Um, the pawn can't take the b5 bishop. So maybe the best opportunity here is knight to c3, in which case the rook plays to c8, and then sort of the same thing as before. Okay. Interesting. So yeah, so in terms of planning here, I think you just sort of play chess. I mean, we're obviously out of the book. I don't know. I don't even think that really there was much in the way of h3 here. But certainly queen takes f3 was the favored move here. Um, You probably play chess in the other opening as well. D takes bishop c5 or knight c6. But conceptually, I think this is really going to be about coming up with a good fitting tactical plan. But I'll allow black a few moves to kind of get developed here before trying to generate something more concrete. Pressure on d4 is going to be bad for black the entire or bad for white the entire game. Um, yeah, there's pretty much no way that pawn is very backwards and very fixed on d4. So that's something to think about. Castles, a6, dangerous. I mean, basically, I don't know how directly black can break in here, but it's just he's at a, he's basically he's losing from move six. This was a well played opening for black. I don't think you could really anticipate him playing pawn takes f6, but bishop takes f3, queen takes f3. Let's look at that line. Here, which is basically the last book move, the moves are c4 challenging the center, d takes c5, but both are basically moves where white will be okay after bishop takes f3. So knight c6, c3, e6. Okay. Um, but yeah, e5, c5, knight f3, bishop b4, h3, bishop takes. Cool. Interesting. Um, I don't know. I guess I'm sort of inclined to play like pawn takes d4, queen takes d4, knight c6, but it's probably safer to just play e6 and develop normally. There's plenty of time to develop pressure on d4. Yep. Yeah, and here, black is basically winning. I don't know if it ever. It's worth looking at the eval to see if it ever gets close. I guess it does. All right, so here's an opportunity to look at. Middle game here, I think white has given you a pretty big handy. White has given you a pretty big favor basically because these f pawns are such a liability. Um, and I think it's a game where black is going to have an opportunity to like attack on d4, and as long as black doesn't really undouble those f pawns, he's going to have a lasting advantage into the endgame. But let's see what happens. Rook d3 allows a tactic. What is this tactic? Okay, so rook d3 was the only kind of dangerous move for black this whole game. Here, knight e2, and the rook appears to be trapped for an exchange. Um, best for black here, bishop h4. Okay, so that threatens to play bishop takes f2, rook to d2. King c2, knight e1, rook takes. So that's with like a pretty complicated tactic. Uh, so without that this knight e2 move. So say white plays knight to e2 here. This rook is definitely trapped. There's gonna be I mean, basically, black has to be really resourceful to find any kind of acceptable tactic here. So for tactical reasons, this rook, gets stuck on d3, and that's a problem for black. I guess in terms of taking away from this, um, I don't know. I guess I would say, try to, be careful of your pieces in enemy territory in the end game, especially if there's minor pieces left on the board. This tactic is complicated. Rook to d2, king to c2 makes a lot of sense for white. Basically this, or sorry, knight to e2. This makes a lot of sense. Basically this rook has limited mobility on d3. White tries to exploit it. That conceptually makes, that's a good idea conceptually, and I don't know if it's. I guess how is black how can black basically slow down and avoid this kind of thing? Ideas are like the engine, by the way, is saying retreat. If we don't want to do that, let's play a5. Here a takes b4, a takes b4, and the rook plays to a1, I guess. This is yeah, keep the rook on an open file. Yeah, I guess that's probably the that's probably the thank you, Ophelia. I think that's probably the takeaway there. Yeah, I guess you know, keep your keep. I guess it's somewhat specific to a rook, but keep your thanks. Keep a rook, you know, basically keep your pieces as mobile as they possibly can be, right? If you eliminate their mobility, you wind up with the ability to get them trapped. That's true in all cases. So I guess I would say here, like, you know, what does uh, what does Rook D3 really gain? I think Rook D3. The idea behind Rook D3, I think, is to prevent Rook to C1, which, you know, sort of demonstrates something, right? Rook to c1 demonstrates how this rook on c3 already has relatively limited mobility. It has no side-to-side mobility. It only has mobility on the c file, and as a result, rook to d3 was played because rook to c1 capitalized on this rook's lack of mobility on c3. The engine's three options are all retreats of the rook. So I guess given that this rook was already, you know, limited mobility, it might be worthy of paying more attention to the idea that, you know, that this rook on the c file could get trapped. You already know its mobility is limited, so that should be kind of a signal. You know, the signal that the rook can trap the rook into a trade should be a signal that there are other opportunities for you know, white to basically trap the rook, and that you know, and then that kind of frame of thinking should make it more easy to see knight e2. Uh, I think that's probably from a you know, a thinking perspective how one could get to that the most easily. The general concept being don't limit the mobility of your pieces if you don't have to. In this case, there was a specific tactical reason that makes sense, you know, tactical explanation, which is okay. So move, you know, the rook to c1 forces the rook to be traded off because of its limited mobility. So that should, but that fact, the fact that the rook to c1, you know, capitalized on limited mobility, should make mobility more of an issue in your mind and more of an issue when evaluating pieces. So that's where I guess I would say the you know, the kind of improvement there could potentially be. Um, Otherwise, this looks good. Uh, yeah, good win. Um, Not much counterplay for white. So takeaways from this game. Uh, White played an unusual h3 and gave black an advantage in the opening. Um, Pawn takes f3 is bad. Queen takes f3 is not quite as bad, but still allows e6 and black to quickly establish control of the center. So either way, that opening really helped. Um, Black plays pretty smoothly, not too many inaccuracies really. You know, basically, I think f4 was proposed as better than, or sorry, queen takes d4 is better than knight to e7 here, which it is, right? Queen takes d4, that pawn appears to be hanging for this move, so yeah, might as well just take it. Um, but that's not much of a strategic thing. That's sort of a, you know, that's sort of a vision thing. Like just queen takes d4 here. The pawn is you've done what you're supposed to do as black. You've quickly developed pressure on this d4 pawn. So given that it's you know, given that you've played knight c6 and threatened this d4 pawn, queen takes d4 is a move that you should definitely play. You were basically playing for it and you got it. So, you know, play it and win the material and be way up. But that's not really a strategic concept or something that, you know, that's basically I guess attention or tactical concept. This I think is more of a strategic assessment issue. I think you can improve by changing your strategy here. If you see that the rook's mobility is limited, make sure that you don't move it to a place where it's more limited. With rook d3 that happens, and knight e2, which wasn't played, really would have caused a problem here. Um, yeah, so if the rook can trap the rook, make sure that the knight can't trap the rook. Um, that's really my biggest, that's really my biggest kind of potential improvement in assessment here. Like, I think overall it's a well played game, good tactics for black. There were multiple things that black did right here. Um, Specific things that black did right. I think like doubling this rooks was good thinking. You have this open file, so you might as well double the rooks and apply a lot of pressure. You did, and you ended up getting that file for basically the rest of the game. Um, and so that was a good idea. And then in terms of other concepts, I think basically given that you have this end game advantage that's based off of the restrictions on these f pawns, I think that you've really you capitalized on this. You queen c4 getting the queens off the board, is maybe a little clumsy, but just fine. It's something that I definitely could have done. It's a good idea. And then when you get the C rooks on the C file or the B file, you're in pretty good shape. The only opportunity was the slip relating to your rook's mobility, and that wasn't capitalized on. So overall, good game, interesting, good win. And yeah, thank you very much for sending me that. It was a solid win. Sort of a demonstration of why in the Caro-Kann or French, the queen has some liabilities on f3, or the pawn, even worse, has liabilities on f3. And generally just a well played game by black. You got an opening advantage, held it, and then apart from one small tactical misstep, smooth sailing into a win. So yeah, overall, good game. Interesting. Thank you very much for showing me that, Key Dude, and yeah, please, yeah, everyone, please keep sending games. I really appreciate, everyone, yeah, everyone contributing to the stream and sending material. It's really fun for me to get to see everyone's games. I learn a lot from these streams, a lot of opening theory, some strategic concepts that I get reinforced. And I'm really happy that you guys are here. So thanks all for being here. I really, yeah, no, really appreciate you all being here, and please feel free to send me more games either on Reddit or on the Discord. Really, any route is good. Could always use more material. And yeah, thank you very much for being here. Next stream is at tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern. And yeah, good night to everyone. Thanks all for being here. Good night. See you later. Bye. Thanks.